Some would argue behind every good man is a driving woman, but sometimes you need to drive a little bit behind the scenes. And as we're going to talk about women and inventions, sometimes women were not named as the official inventor, but were behind the scenes. And as we'll get into that, there might be a good reason. Over time in America, we had to make progress for women's rights. For many racial groups, cultural groups, and women in particular, there was a progression to being in the forefront, to having the power to do things, and to even think about being immersed in technology. I would say that in early America, building the country as Americans did, sometimes women had to be a little more behind the scenes. And I would also give the example of women didn't attain a higher education until much later. Sometimes if women didn't see themselves doing a certain career, they would think, well, perhaps I don't need a higher education for that career. So they were often told to choose a realistic career. We have often heard this quote. Abigail Adams implored her husband, when you're writing or taking part in writing the Declaration of Independence, don't forget the ladies. And sometimes I think, well, maybe they did forget the ladies, but there's always somebody there reminding those people in the positions of power, don't forget us, we're here. We're a valid part of society. And I'm going to jump ahead to 1920 because women did gain the right to vote in America. And when I see my students in the senior seminar, we forget how young they are. Sometimes we think of timelines and we know those timelines, but this age group need to know that my mother could not vote. She was married in 1927 and she only had a few years of voting because anytime they change a law or pass legislation, it takes a while to enact that. So we also need to know the timeline of World War II because a lot of students and their parents have seen Rosie the Riveter. And what we do more deeply than we'll discuss today is that in World War II, there were 12 million women. That was a quarter of the workforce. They were already working. By the end of the war, that number was up to 18 million or a third of the workforce, but I also get into the economics of the situation that we don't often hear is that after the war, when the men came home, women were still working, but often at a lesser pay grade. So it's not that they all went home and had babies. You know, there are some data out there that support that argument. But let's move forward even faster and farther to Title IX of 1972. And a lot of the students, when you ask them what was Title IX, they often say, oh, that's where women got to play sports in the schools. Well, yes, but there was a lot more to it, as we know in my age group. That was really the institutional decision that if the federal government was going to put money into higher education, and we better support in all education fields, I think it trickled down to even the state level, that we really have to support it with our dollars, and if we are going to support an education with tax dollars, we really should give a variety of experiences, but they better be equal. And I always tell my students that's when I got to play basketball by boys' rules. Before that, we had to play with girls' rules, and we didn't have any girls' sports team. So I was very excited. And the reason that I chose Mothers of Invention is because in Women's History Month, we were reminded that women did take part. And as I remind the students, sometimes women had to kind of go around about way to gain the credit for an invention. And sometimes she didn't want to do all that, she just wanted to get the invention out there, so maybe a father or a brother or a husband would take that invention to fruition. We often say Robert Fulton was the father of the steamboat, or that Ben Franklin was the father of electricity. So this is the example of It's really difficult to use this mothers of invention phrase. It's sometimes just something that we've said a lot in that phrase, and we never really thought about it. But let's think of today, mothers of inventions, and it's really difficult to think of it this way, as I said before, but also a lot of the terminology that we use is gender specific, and we don't really think about that. I have a series of fun questions, and this is something I do with my class. And it's not that you get it right or wrong, but in my class I use a poll anywhere and let students answer and see how many questions they get right. But for the sake of today, just in your own mind, so we can get through these slides and get you just to thinking about how many inventions there were, just take a guess, and then the next slide you'll see if you are correct or not. Which of the following was invented by a mother of invention, invented by a woman? If you take a guess in your own mind, let's see how correct you were. Mary Anderson was the correct answer. She was issued a patent for the windshield wiper in 1905. So the next time you go down the street and your wipers are off flapping, you think of Mary. Which of the following was invented by a mother of invention? And the first one, that's where you have a wind cups that measure wind velocity. Anemometer, disposable cell phone, bikini, or Rolodex. And in your own mind, if you guessed, the disposable cell phone. This was an important invention of its day. With the whole terrorism thing, I don't think we see the disposable cell phone so much anymore. But it was an idea that came to Randus. She was just driving down the roadway, talking on her cell phone, which I say is not really acceptable behavior. She was getting really frustrated that her phone signal was fading in and out, and she wanted to hurl the phone out the window, which she thought about, a disposable cell phone. One you can use and throw away. Which of the following was invented by a mother of invention? If you think in your own mind, you have the right answer. Cracker Jacks, Raggedy Ann doll, Barbie doll, or Mr. Potato Head. Ruth Handler. She invented the Barbie doll in 1959. She was watching her children cutting out paper dolls and decided they were making sort of a reality conversation and game. So as the children got older, maybe they needed an older doll to play with. And Ken was added later after her son, so those were named after her children. Fun fact, Barbie's first words, and in my day, you pulled a string and there was an electronic voice to a doll. Barbie's first words were, "Math is tough." Mattel, the company that rolled out her invention, Barbie, thought they were simply expressing the feelings of most school-age girls at the time. Many parents and teachers thought Barbie should just shut up. So shortly after that, they came out with a version and Barbie stopped talking. Which of the following health-related inventions was not invented by a mother invention? Why would I say not? Because I wanted you to see some that are in the variety of answers. Disposable diapers. Nystatin is for medicinal purposes. It was a groundbreaking antifungal medicine. Diabetes test or Band-Aids. So in other words, 3 of these inventions were by a woman, 1 was not. Earl Dixon invented the Band-Aid. It was marketed by Johnson & Johnson. Which of the following was invented by a mother of invention? Graham crackers, saran wrap, Rumford fireplace, or a dishwasher? And the reason I chose this one because I thought the pictures were pretty cool. This was Josephine Cochran and her invention, the dishwasher. And I think that's pretty ingenious, you know, something usually by the early women inventors were something that helped with a task or chore they thought could be made easier. Which of the following was invented by a mother of invention? Whiteout, Scotch tape, fax machine, or hole punch? Bet Nesmith Graham invented whiteout, and we don't type much anymore, so it doesn't seem like a huge deal, but those of us who did use a typewriter, that was huge in its day. Which mother of invention was famous for her work with computers? Ruth Handler? Stephanie? Ooh, I think we'll see one of these names later. Grace Hopper? Patsy Sherman? Grace Hopper. I thought this was a pretty cool gal. She was a physics person at Vassar. She wasn't an instructor yet. Later she joined Yale. She was in the Navy, and there are two pictures of one of her earlier photographs and one that was when she was very close to retirement and she still donned her Navy uniform. The thing that I thought was so neat about Grace Hopper when I was doing my investigations was that she invented the base computer instructions, a human instruction translated into a computer, and she thought about digitalizing into COBOL software. So she was the underlying inventor of COBOL software. What year did a mother of invention first receive a US patent? And this is kind of enlightening because those dates are all over the place. And the first US patent by a woman was 1809. And utilitarian inventions, and that is just a rendering, it's not an actual photograph, but a picture of what she invented. May 15, 1809. Keyes, who was a Connecticut native, she invented a specific patent for weaving straw with silk thread for hat making, and that was huge in its day. So if that, propagated the industry to make plenty of hats, all women wore them in that day. But I think most importantly, the Patent Act of 1790 was supposed to open the door for anyone, male or female, to get a patent. But since women couldn't even own property, they couldn't vote, they, in some instances, were not treated as a person that could really handle a bank account, and it had to sometimes be in the husband's name. A lot of times they didn't bother, and as I said before, the husband would take those patents through to fruition. But the first one was in 1809. What mother of invention, well, that doesn't make any sense. I think I changed that this morning, didn't save changes. What did Margaret Knight invent? Scotchgard, Kevlar, colored buttons, or a grocery bag? This I thought was important to include because Margaret Knight, and I love gears, I guess I'm a gearhead, but I thought the invention was pretty cool. She invented a better way to make a grocery bag, and the paper bags were big in the day, but there was a little stink about that. She really had to fight to get that patent and to get that invention. So I thought that was important, that it was the first court case that I saw where a patent was stolen, and she had to get those rights back. But her first invention, when she was 12, she saw a very gruesome accident in a textile mill. And whenever you think of machines in our production labs or in industry, there's always that red stop button. She was the first one that thought of the stop motion. What did Sarah Mather, mother of invention, receive a patent for? Submarine telescope, fax machine, pyrotechnic flare, or a colored button? I just had to include that because I thought the invention was so darn cool. Sarah Mather received a patent for the invention of the submarine telescope lamp in 1845. And it was used on vessels in the ocean. You could imagine how important that device was. Which of the following is a mother of invention for a new film developing method for NASA? And I'll hurry through these. Sarah Mather, Barbara Askins, Mary Dixon Keyes, or Grace Hopper? This is Barbara Askins. She originally taught school, and then she decided to go back to school and further education. She won Inventor of the Year in 1978. She also invented a device that was used for film developing in space. And it was also a carryover for Kodak to use in other ways. Which mother of invention is noted for inventing the modern brassiere? And this is probably a key point in the presentation to see if anybody's still paying attention. Sarah Mather, Barbara Askins, Mary Dixon Keyes, or Mary Phelps Jacob? Mary Phelps Jacob. Mostly uncomfortable corsets were used. Well, really, the long and short of the reason I included this one it's not that Mary had to fight for her invention, but she had to fight for a company that was sold the rights to market that invention, but she wasn't given credit. Suddenly that corporation grew very large and kind of stole her thunder. So they kind of have to go back and give her credit for that. Who invented the patent on the ironing board? You wouldn't think that was a big deal in its day, but everything was ironed and ironed very intricately. Sarah Mather, Barbara, Sarah, Grace, who was it? Sarah Boone. And this is kind of cool because I just like to see the inventions. But it was really tricky to iron the sleeves and intricate pleats, and she came out with the invention. So if you see, a lot of these are utilitarian needs that women saw. Which mother of invention secretly worked on a coding system, and its importance was not recognized until later decades? Patsy, Dr. Temple Grandin, Hedy Lamarr, or Anne Moore? This was a sultry actress of the 1940s, and it's pretty cool if you want to do a report on her. She was a very famous actress, but in World War II, she helped to develop secret communications and try to fight the Nazis. So they had to come up with a way for her messages if they were intercepted and decoded. And she worked with another person, but mostly the patent in 1941 was galvanized for the digital communications boom. The whole digital idea was first thought of there. Who is credited for inventing the first circular saw? Since I'm in the School of Technology and we have a construction lab, I had to come up with that one because I thought it was pretty cool. And Tabitha Babbitt invented that. She was sort of inside looking out and deciding, you know, that back and forth, you know, if they had a circular, she came up with that idea. There's another one they kind of had to go back and argue about who really gets the credit for that one. Who invented the Toll House cookie? Well, when I have a class at that point, you know, we think the chocolate chip cookie is pretty important, but Ruth Wakefield, she had graduated from a normal school. She and her husband were running a business. Anyway, the long and short of it, she accidentally came up with this recipe when some broken chips came into the cookie dough, and it might not seem like an invention, but man, you can't look anywhere without that chocolate chip cookie, and it took a while to figure out who was the first. This is the really important one, and my son thought this was pretty cool. 1966, Stephanie Koech. What do you think she invented? If I thought it was cool and my son thought it was cool, it must be Kevlar. And we all know Kevlar is used for bulletproofing, but you know, it's also important in a lot of building of suspension bridges, camping gear. It's found in composite materials in a lot of ways, shapes, and forms. But Kevlar was pretty darn important, so I'm proud there. Okay, last question. How many mothers of inventions are there currently in total? And this is to give you an idea, framework of what number are we talking about. To sum this up, until about 1840, there weren't very many patents issued to women, but today hundreds of thousands are issued. So D would be the correct answer. But the good news in this whole presentation is that I think you see that the climate is changing for women, gender issues in America, and that's what it takes to get women interested in the STEM subjects, math, science, technology, engineering. You know, women have to see themselves in those positions before they can aspire to them. In my day, I remember going to my high school guidance counselor, who I'd love to argue with now, but anyway, I had taken a test and my counselor said, well, you have really good mechanical engineering skills, but alas, but since there aren't any schools for you, pointed me to nursing and teaching as a profession. So good news, you don't have to think about that in this day and age.